Early morning, Warrington. Frost creeps over windscreens, engines tick in silence. Outside a seemingly ordinary industrial unit, a row of police surveillance vans waits. A single signal broke the silence. Doors are forced open. Inside, detailed ledgers, stacks of cash, burner phones with encrypted lines. Hidden behind what looked like a normal business was an empire quietly feeding the streets. They didn't look like gangsters. They looked like businessmen. But behind those doors was one of the UK's most tightly run drug cartels, built by twin brothers who turned Warrington into their base. This is the story of Leon and Anthony Cullen, the identical twins who created an empire from print shops and front companies, until the long arm of the law finally reached them. Most people only hear stories like this after they've vanished. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now, before this one disappears as well. Before the raids, before the headlines, there were just two boys growing up in Warrington. Leon and Anthony Cullen were born in 1987, identical twins from a modest, hard-working family on the Longford estate. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and dreams rarely made it beyond the town limits. Their childhood wasn't defined by violence or poverty, but by proximity. Warrington sat perfectly between two of the North's most powerful influences, Liverpool to the west and Manchester to the east. In the late 1990s, both cities were booming, not with opportunity, but with cocaine and cash. The drug trade had become its own economy. Flashy cars on narrow streets, designer clothes at local pubs, signs that ordinary men were becoming something more. For a generation of young people, that lifestyle didn't look criminal. It looked successful. And the Cullen twins were watching. They were inseparable, two sides of one coin. Anthony, calm and calculating. The diplomat. The one who could walk into any room and talk his way out of trouble. Leon, fiery and impulsive. The enforcer. The one whose presence alone could change the atmosphere. Teachers saw promise in Anthony, they said he had the mind for business. Leon? They said he had the drive but not the patience. What no one realized was how dangerous that combination could become when both sides worked together. There was no criminal background in their family. Their parents weren't gangsters. They weren't connected. But the world around them was shifting fast. By their teens, drug money was everywhere, filtered through car washes, pubs, and illegitimate, small businesses. People they'd grown up with were now driving imported cars, flashing gold, and carrying phones that never stopped ringing. The Cullen twins weren't content to watch from the sidelines. They took notes. Observed how dealers moved, how they hid assets, who stayed free, and who didn't. Every mistake they saw became a lesson. By 16, Leon was already earning a reputation, not as a thug, but as someone who didn't hesitate. If a problem needed fixing, he handled it. Anthony played it quieter, studying how things operated, who supplied whom, and where the real money flowed. They didn't jump straight into the chaos. They planned. They built contacts, watched markets, and learned from older Liverpool crews who treated the trade less like a street hustle and more like logistics. And that's what separated the Cullen brothers from everyone else. They saw drug dealing not as rebellion, but as business. By the mid-2000s, Leon and Anthony Cullen were no longer just curious observers. They'd stepped into the game, quietly, strategically, and far earlier than anyone realized. It began small. Late-night exchanges in car parks. Quiet drop-offs outside pubs. Envelopes passed from hand to hand. The early signs of something structured, not chaos, but coordination. The twins weren't chasing notoriety. They avoided the loud lifestyles that usually exposed young dealers. No photos with stacks of cash. No social media flash. Their first rule was simple: don't show what you have. Their second, don't talk about what you do. While others craved status, the Cullens built systems. Every move had a purpose. Every deal had a record. By their early 20s, both brothers had started showing a sense for business that most small-time dealers lacked. They registered companies, legitimate ones on paper, that allowed money to move cleanly and quietly. One of them was spot-on signs, a print and design business based in Warrington. To the public, it looked like a small family-run firm. But behind the invoices and printer ink, detectives would later find it was a cover, a shell through which thousands of pounds flowed every week. They kept ledgers, detailed notes, schedules that mapped out deliveries, drop points, and supply routes. It wasn't the work of impulsive street dealers, it was the structure of a network learning how to launder its own success. What began as small-scale dealing soon grew through connections across Liverpool and beyond. The twins were methodical, using trusted intermediaries, coded language on encrypted phones, and legitimate accounts to disguise illegal profits. They diversified. Cash came in from multiple sources, some legitimate, some not, but all traced back to the same careful coordination. And it didn't go unnoticed. By this time, Cheshire Police and the National Crime Agency were beginning to notice irregularities. Deliveries that didn't add up. Income that didn't match declared turnover. Unusual travel patterns between Warrington, Widnes, and Liverpool, all tied to vehicles linked to the same circle of men. Still, the pattern wasn't complete. Detectives were watching, but they didn't have enough to move. Not yet. Because the real question wasn't what the Cullen twins were doing, it was who they were doing it for. The suspicion was growing. These two young men from Warrington weren't operating alone. Police were certain the Cullens answered to someone higher. A supplier with international reach, capable of moving product on a scale far beyond local street deals. And so, surveillance continued. Quietly. Patiently. They didn't know it yet, but every call, every car, every coded message, was tightening the noose. By the late 2000s, the name Cullen was already circulating quietly through the intelligence units of Cheshire Police. They weren't known for chaos or violence, they were known for control. After months of covert surveillance, wiretaps, and tracking coded communications, detectives launched a new initiative. They called it Operation Cortex, the first coordinated attempt to dismantle the Cullen brothers' network. Early one morning, police vans surrounded several Warrington properties. The order came through radios. Officers stormed in, doors splintered, flashlights cut through darkness, and the silence of the Cullen operation finally broke. Inside, investigators found bundles of cash, high-purity cocaine, and meticulous ledgers recording quantities, prices, and dates. This wasn't the work of amateurs. It was the mark of men who treated organized crime like corporate management. Leon Cullen, the dominant twin, was arrested and later sentenced to 9 years in prison. For most, that would have been the end of the story. But for Leon, it was only a pause. Behind the scenes, his brother Anthony Cullen stepped forward. Calm, calculated, and less visible, Anthony quietly absorbed what remained of the network. He trimmed connections, stayed low profile, and kept the money moving. For a time, it worked. But police pressure never stopped. Through financial tracing and informant tips, the remnants of the operation slowly came back into focus. Eventually, Anthony Cullen too was arrested and sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for his role in the supply chain. Both brothers were now behind bars. Different cells. Same mindset. Inside, they didn't crumble. They studied. They watched how others failed. And how control was lost through arrogance, exposure, and noise. Leon learned the value of silence. Anthony learned the art of systems. Between the two, a blueprint was forming, one built on discipline, hierarchy, and invisibility. To most, prison marks the end of the story. For the Cullen brothers, it became their classroom. They understood that real power wasn't about standing on street corners, it was about being unseen, yet obeyed. By the time they'd served their sentences, they weren't just dealers anymore. They were strategists. And when those gates finally opened again, they didn't come out to rebuild. They came out to expand. Most empires end in prison. For the Cullens, it was only the beginning. You've seen how it started, how control was born from silence. If you've watched this far and haven't subscribed, you're missing the next move before it happens. Don't be the one who finds out second. Hit subscribe now, before the next chapter drops. When the gates opened, they didn't walk out as broken men, they walked out as planners. Leon and Anthony Cullen had served their time, but their ambitions had multiplied behind bars. They'd studied structures, watched mistakes, and understood one thing: chaos attracts attention. Control creates power. By 2015, the brothers re-emerged in Warrington with what looked like a legitimate business, Future Press Limited. On paper, it was a promotional goods and printing company. It had invoices, delivery vans, office staff, and even payroll records. To the outside world, it was a clean, ambitious startup. But beneath the spreadsheets and uniforms, millions in drug money were quietly cycling through. Future Press Limited wasn't just a cover. It was a system. Every courier, every street runner, and every accountant had a title and a salary. There were performance bonuses, a code of conduct, and consequences for those who broke it. Leon Cullen ran the empire like a corporate director, detached, precise, rarely seen. He handled strategy, expansion, and the big numbers, the flow of cocaine across counties and into networks that stretched from Merseyside to Manchester and from North Wales to the northeast. His orders were filtered down through layers of trusted lieutenants. Anthony Cullen was the operations man, the logistics expert. He oversaw the movement, who picked up, who dropped off, which van left when, and what route it took. He ran meetings in quiet industrial units, where couriers received coded messages, burner phones, and cash. Every detail mattered. Every risk was accounted for. And soon, their operation was generating an estimated £290,000 per month, a figure investigators would later confirm through seized ledgers and encrypted messages. But power like that doesn't stand alone. It's guarded. A man named Chris Houghton maintained the brothers' arsenal, handguns, ammunition, and modified weapons kept for protection. Sean Ryan, a trusted associate, led the enforcement arm. If someone owed money or broke the chain of loyalty, Ryan made sure they remembered who they worked for. The brothers believed their new empire was untouchable, clean, organized, invisible. But what they didn't know was that every van, every courier, and every drop was being watched. By late 2016, something had shifted. The Cullens were making money faster than they could move it, and the police knew it. Behind closed doors, Cheshire Constabulary launched a covert mission, Operation Samurai. It was one of the most complex surveillance campaigns in the region's history. Months of intelligence had pointed to a high-level drug syndicate operating under corporate disguise. But no one knew how deep it ran, or how disciplined the men at the top truly were. Officers began small. Tracking vehicles. Intercepting texts. Listening to silence, the kind of silence that only encrypted phones make. Each ping, each registration plate, each burner number built a pattern. A map of power spreading quietly across the northwest. Over the next 18 months, every van linked to Future Press was shadowed. Couriers were followed into motorway service stations, countryside drop points, and dim-lit warehouses where deliveries changed hands. They weren't reckless. They used coded language, tickets, paper, machines. But no code lasts forever. And by early 2017, investigators cracked the rhythm. The Cullens' business wasn't just Warrington-based, it connected directly to Liverpool's Tobin brothers, long-established cocaine wholesalers with international reach. The link was subtle, hidden under layers of intermediaries and cash couriers, until one meeting changed everything. In the quiet outskirts of Cheshire, detectives watched from unmarked vans as four men gathered by the hedgerows. Anthony Cullen, calm and calculating. John Tobin, the supplier. Robbie Broughton, a former cage fighter turned enforcer. And Robert Bibby, the trusted runner. No words were recorded, but movements spoke louder. A handshake. A nod. And a box lifted from one boot into another. To the police, that single exchange confirmed it. The Cullen network wasn't just local, it was plugged directly into one of Britain's largest drug pipelines. From that moment, surveillance intensified. Wiretaps. Vehicle bugs. Drone footage. Operation Samurai grew into a full-scale national collaboration between Cheshire Police, Merseyside Police, and the National Crime Agency. Then, in August 2017, the waiting ended. A routine transport run turned into history. Officers intercepted a convoy believed to be linked to the Cullen supply chain. Inside, 186 kilograms of high-purity cocaine. One of the largest land seizures ever recorded in the UK. Each block was stamped with markings tied to known South American cartels. Each route had been planned with military precision. And each trace led, directly or indirectly, back to the Cullen brothers' network. The operation was collapsing from the inside, and the Cullens didn't even know. Phones were cloned. Conversations recorded. Associates flipped. The very people they trusted most were feeding information back to the task force. For Leon and Anthony, nothing seemed unusual. Business carried on, deliveries were made, and cash was counted. But the invisible circle around them was closing. Every transaction, every courier, every contact, already compromised. They didn't see it coming, because they thought they'd already won. You've just seen how one empire fell, but others are still standing. Subscribe now, because when their stories break, this channel will be the first to tell you. January 10, 2018. Before dawn, a convoy of unmarked vans rolled silently through Warrington's back streets. Inside, armed officers from Cheshire Police, the National Crime Agency, and regional task forces waited for a single command. When it came, they moved as one. It was the culmination of years of surveillance, intercepted messages, and international intelligence. Dozens of addresses were targeted at once: homes, safe houses, and lockups. Each location had been mapped, timed, and confirmed down to the minute. At one of those addresses, officers stormed a converted property linked to the Cullen network. Inside, they found what investigators later described as an arsenal. Rifles, handguns, silencers, fragmentation grenades, ammunition, and stacks of cash. Some weapons had been modified for automatic fire, others were stored behind false walls. Anthony Cullen was arrested without resistance. He said little, calm as officers cuffed him and read his rights. In that moment, the quiet face of the empire was finished. But Leon Cullen, the twin who planned, directed, and rarely showed his face, was gone. Within hours of the raids, he'd vanished from the UK. Investigators later discovered he had fled the country using false documentation, disappearing into the heat and glass of Dubai. While the UK press reported the arrests, a second operation began, an international manhunt coordinated through the National Crime Agency and Interpol. Leads came in from Spain, the Netherlands, and the UAE. Leon had built connections abroad, safe houses, financial contacts, and offshore links that helped him hide. For nearly 2 years, his name remained on the NCA's most wanted list, and his image circulated with a simple warning: do not approach. Considered dangerous. Then, in January 2020, after quiet negotiations between British and Emirati authorities, the chase ended. Leon Cullen was located, arrested in Dubai, and returned to the UK under armed escort. The man who once controlled one of Britain's most structured cocaine networks was finally in handcuffs. When the Cullen empire fell, Warrington didn't fall silent, it exploded. Within months, a wave of violence swept across the region. Petrol bombs, drive-by shootings, and grenade attacks turned quiet streets into battlegrounds. The vacuum left by Leon and Anthony Cullen was quickly contested by rivals, each fighting for control of a network that had once run with corporate precision. To prevent an all-out war, Cheshire Police increased armed patrols, set up surveillance zones, and brought in additional tactical units. It wasn't just about drugs anymore, it was about dominance. In Liverpool Crown Court, 2021, the scale of the Cullen operation finally became clear. Judges and prosecutors described it as one of the most structured organized crime networks the Northwest has ever seen. At the top were the brothers themselves. Anthony Cullen, the calm, calculating organizer, was sentenced to 27 years. Leon Cullen, the strategist who ran his empire from the shadows and was later extradited from Dubai, 22 years and 6 months. Their armorer, Chris Houghton, supplied and maintained an arsenal of firearms, including rifles, pistols, and grenades, for 20 years. Their enforcer, Sean Ryan, responsible for intimidation, debt collection, and violence, 14 years. Below them, other key associates faced justice. Robert Bibby, convicted for his role in distribution and transport, 7 years and 11 months. Nigel Gerke, linked to supply and storage operations, 10 years. The rest, a network of drivers, couriers, launderers, and middlemen, received sentences ranging between 10 and 13 years each. In total, 20 members of the Cullen organization were sentenced to a combined 185 years in prison. Soon after sentencing, Cheshire Police released aged digital images of Leon and Anthony Cullen, showing how the brothers might look after serving their terms. The message was unmistakable. Power fades. Time wins. It was less a warning and more a prophecy. Leon and Anthony Cullen began as two brothers from Warrington chasing respect, driven by ambition, loyalty, and a hunger for power. They turned street trade into structure, and crime into a corporation. Every rule, every protocol, every layer of control was designed to make their world untouchable. But empires built on control don't collapse suddenly, they decay from within. One mistake, one message, one trusted voice turning silent. That's all it takes for the illusion to crack. In the end, the Cullen brothers didn't just lose their freedom. They became a cautionary tale. Proof that discipline and structure can't outlast time, pressure, or consequence. Their empire was clean on paper, invisible in practice, and designed to last. Until it didn't. So what do you think? Were the Cullens criminal masterminds, or businessmen who thought they could outsmart the system? If this story gripped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the next case that shakes Britain's underworld.